Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 144. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dan Ram. Dan travels the globe as an event MC and speaker at over 100 events a year, hosting changemakers like President Barack Obama, billionaire founders Sir Richard Branson and Reid Hoffman, F1 champion Nico Rosberg, Grammy-winning artists and celebrities. He works on 4 continents, from college campuses to parliaments to in-house corporate innovative days for Fortune 500 companies to the biggest tech conferences in the world. His passion is to inspire people with his motto, start now, start simple, in building a future we all want to live in. Dan, I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
And thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited about this conversation.
I am too. I usually start by asking people to tell me their backstory, how they got into this, and I definitely want to go there. But because I mentioned this motto towards the end of the bio, I do want to start with it. I think it'll probably be a great lesson for us. I'm curious to know more about it. What do you mean by start now, start simple? And how does that help you help others?
Thank you so much for that question. That mantra was something that was learned the hard way. I remember when I was in elementary school and my parents put me in classical piano classes. It was brutal. I had a very tough teacher who would make me do the most mundane drills, scales up and down the keyboard. And I thought, I'm never going to learn a song that way. Fast forward now 25 years, I can play any song in any genre, not just on piano, but in multiple instruments. But you only do that one step at a time. I think about the businesses I built, and however ambitious or big they eventually turn out to be, at the beginning, it's actually something very simple and mundane. Maybe an idea on a piece of paper, maybe a conversation with a friend. So everything in my life that seemed difficult and what today we would consider success, actually at its starting point, was just a simple step. And so when I kept encouraging people about that, it came down to 2 moments. I said, you got to start now. You got to start simple. The moment, the time period is today, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year. And the step you'll take is the simplest step, the lowest hanging fruit, not the most complex. And so that's kind of become the motto, because generally people say, how do you become a global speaker? Or how do you build a business? Or how do I change my lifestyle? Or how do I get more productive? I know that's a big topic for you.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that? Well, you start now and you start simple.
Nice. Okay, so now you've given us the framework or the mindset behind your story. So now I'd actually like to hear your story, and how did you, what is your origin, and how did you get to where you are today?
So the origin story is that I'm born to 2 amazing Indian parents who grew up in India, and then dad became a diplomat. And so my sister and I ended up traveling the world. We grew up in, I think, 7 countries or 8 countries together, in Africa, Middle East, Europe. And then I went to the US to study. I went to Yale University and I got an economics degree there. And then I went to Trinity College to do an MBA. And now I'm doing a PhD at RWTH, which is a university in Germany. And in between, I did a lot of work. I love school. I'm good at it, as you can tell from the credentials, but I think I learned more by doing. And so I also love work. And thankfully, over the last 15 years or so of work, I have done quite a variety of things, from working for the UN to KPMG to startups, building my own startups, as well as joining larger companies, nonprofit work, government work, and more. And I kind of weave all of that into what I do today, which is I'm an MC, sometimes known as a moderator, sometimes known as a host of an event, a master of ceremonies at major tech conferences. So I spend my time interviewing people that may have been my peers when I was working before. So change makers, decision makers, people in education, and startups, founders, investors, and so much more.
Interesting. Wow. So let's talk about that last piece that you just mentioned. What was it that prompted you to transition from doing the work, from being in the tech field more in terms of the startup activity and building your business and all of that, and moving into the MC role? That's not, from what I understand, and for people that I've spoken with, it's not a traditional trajectory for most folks. Sometimes you kind of
Yeah.
like move into the
Traditional
MC. Yeah, go ahead.
traditional would be what you're doing, actually,
Yeah,
like hosting podcasts or
right.
being on radio or television, doing a media background. So you're
Yep,
100% right about that. You have a higher chance of being an MC than I do.
right.
But actually, for me, it was the same mindset of solving problems, right? As a founder, I was pitching at these events. As an investor, I was scouting at these events. As someone with ideas, formulas, resources, I was presenting at these events. And the one constant issue at events is it's overwhelming. There is just too much, too many ideas, too many people. How do you network effectively? How do you meet people? How do you not burn out, with all the information that's coming at you? And they also were boring. Yeah, that was the other issue. If you sit down on the main stage or any stage for 8 hours, generally the energy is very low. The intellectual energy might be high, but the experiential energy is very low. And so it's just a problem that was worth solving. And I thought, look, we got some of the smartest people in the world, some of the most inspiring people in the world on stage. And then you got a room full of people that are aspiring, that are wanting, that are spending top dollar to be here to learn. Why can this connection not be better? And so that's why I stepped into it, just to solve problems. And I still do that to this day. I think in the early days, I was focusing primarily on the speaker experience. How do I prep them backstage? How do I make sure that they're comfortable on stage? All of that would be the traditional experience of an MC. And then it went to the other side where I was like, let me think about the audience. How do we make this the best experience for the audience? And then things started shifting over there. And now I'm thinking about the event organizers. And I'm thinking, okay, they all want to innovate. They all want to step out. How can I help them with that? So I'm always solving problems, constantly solving problems.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to unpack the engagement piece as an educator, a professional educator. That's something that's always top of mind for me. But I'm curious to know, with regards to, once you started to go down this road in your mind, at least, of, I want to start to change what I'm seeing at these events, make them more positive experiences for everybody involved and all of that. You still, I would imagine, had some kind of learning curve. I mean, like, if you didn't have any background in MC type work, to just jump into that would seem to be like a scary thing. So I'm happy to hear more about
Yeah.
your experience, but I'd love for you to translate it, if you will, to those who are in need, either see a need or they feel a need to make some kind of change to an area where they're not so experienced, maybe they're not so comfortable, it's scary. This is obviously a very public role, what you've taken. And so, some people jump into, they love the limelight, but not everybody does. And yet they still need to be able to step in, to lean in, and to make some meaningful changes despite all of that. So curious to hear more about your experience there and how that you think might translate for others.
I love this question because you're really asking about the power of adaptability and how can people adapt during times of change, of transition, moving from one to another. And as you know from my childhood background, that was something I was forced to learn is how do you adapt moving from country to country? And as you just learned from my professional background, it's also what I had to do going from career to career. And needless to say, because we live longer and we're able to be more productive. And because of the pace of change with innovation technology, whoever you are in whatever industry, I'm telling you now, if you haven't experienced change already, you will. And so I think the topic of adaptability is very important. And it is the topic of my PhD. So that said, if I were to break this down to something practical that everyone listening right now could do, I'd break it down to 3 steps. Number one, you got to let go of the past. Number two, you got to engage with the present. And number three, you got to position for the future. So let me give an actual example so that this theory goes into practice. I had a very well-established career as a speaker before the pandemic. Remember the pandemic? Everybody's life changed. And mine changed immediately because as a freelancer who depends on being on stage to make money, as soon as travel and being on stage was not permitted, it ended, like, completely.
Yeah.
There was no safety net. There was no government handout. There was no salary and no work from home now. Nothing. It completely stopped. I went from having revenue lined up to having nothing. So first thing I do is let go of the past. I appreciated, celebrated, and then grieved what was a wonderful chapter. A chapter of traveling the world, being on big stages, going to conferences, and you got to engage with that. You gotta have that moment where you go, that was a chapter. And then you gotta be able to turn that page. See, if I kept holding on to that quality of life, that expectation of income, that expectation of client, I could never have done step two. So step one is you got to let go of the past. Part of that is celebration. Part of that is grieving. Second is you got to engage with the present. And for me, that meant also moving countries. I actually moved back home during that time. Typically, that's what people do when they don't have income coming in. I was no different. So I moved back home. And I thought, what does home provide that my life outside and around the world did not? One of those was routine. And so I engaged with routine. I discovered how much I love discipline, being able to exercise every day, being able to eat healthy. And that transformation started taking effect almost immediately. And for the entire pandemic period, it was unbelievable. One small thing, discipline and routine, started changing literally how I looked, to how I felt, to my energy levels and everything else. And then I started thinking, what was something I wasn't able to do before? Well, I couldn't take classes before because I was constantly traveling. So I started spending more time playing the piano and singing and watching interviews and researching others and understanding the history of emceeing and things like that. So I just started acquiring all of this knowledge and additional skills that I wasn't afforded the time to prior to that. But that's engaging with the present. What does this moment give me? Now, I'm obviously telling you the ones I did that worked in my favor. And during that time, I also did puzzles, and I realized you can't make a career doing puzzles. I also spent a lot of time playing tennis and basketball, but I was too old to become a professional basketball player or a tennis player. So there were some things that aligned with what would be step three and some things that didn't, but it's okay. That's engaging with the present. And then step three is the natural result of step one, letting go of the past. Step two, engaging with the present, which is positioning for the future. Because during that time, as I was playing the piano, I discovered a music studio. And I spoke to the music studio, and initially we went in to record some music. But I saw in them a twinkle in their eye, a curiosity, a sense of what next. And their industry was going down too during the pandemic. So I pitched to them and said, you've got cameras here to record your music videos. You got very, very high quality equipment. You have a green screen. How would you feel about using your same knowledge, but for a virtual event? And they said, well, we've never done it, but let's give it a go. And so my little piano activity led me to a studio, which we then converted into a virtual studio. And I think you can tell where the story is about to end, which is that some of the biggest companies in the world, like Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, and others, were reaching out to our studio in India in order to transmit virtual events across the world, because we were able to do it at a price point that we couldn't. It was fortune, but also this willingness to adapt that had me move from a very high cost of production in Europe or Middle East to a very low cost of production in India. I went from a different culture. In Europe, there's a culture of professionalism where people do what they're good at doing. Whereas in India, there's a culture of learning, of being curious. And so these music experts were willing to learn a new skill set to adapt themselves. So moving countries, letting go of the past, engaging the present, playing the piano, these things led perfectly to positioning for the future. And I actually ended up having a career in the virtual emceeing world that surpassed my career in the in-person experience. And when the pandemic ended, I was really excited to get back on stage again. But needless to say, this is just an example, practically, of taking this theory and seeing how the results play out.
Wow. Wow. The thing, I'll be very honest with you, that was an incredible story, and there's so much to learn from it. The skeptic in me, if that's the right term, and I think the little figurine, so to speak, that places itself comfortably on people's shoulders as we're thinking about scary moments and moments of transition, opportunity, all of that, says, well, that's great for you, Dan, because it all worked out for you. You know, you had a place to go, and you fortuitously chanced upon this studio and this, that, and the other. I recognize you had a lot of other things that you were obviously actively involved with in order to make it all happen. But one
Mm,
could blow it off and say, you know, you were just fortunate.
mm.
What I'm trying to figure out here is, how do we expand your story, your great story, in a way that everybody who needs to transition because of changes in the marketplace, because of relationships that go sour at work, because of certain other skills that are just evolving in the world at large, and they're not quite ready for it. How do people how would you advise people? I know you talked earlier about taking that first step and doing it now. That's a piece of it, I'm sure. But how else would you encourage people to meet their fears and say that I'm not just going to be, I can do this too, I guess is the point. Because oftentimes you hear these stories, say, wow, that worked for them, but that can't work for me. How do you translate it so that everybody can take practical action from your experience?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And always, when you look back on life, at least as my personality, I look at the positives. I look at the things that worked out. But the reality is, there's a lot that doesn't work out. And for sure, luck plays a big part in everybody's life. I'm a person of faith, so I will say that favor plays a big part in everybody's life. Um, but I think you can work your luck and your favor. So if you
I
try 10
agree.
things, and if you're uh say say luck is 10% of the time, and you try 10 things, that means only one of those 10 things is going to work. But if you move that to trying 100 things, that means any of 10 need to work for it to be successful. If you move it to 1,000, any of 100. So I'd say you can work your luck. So I
Hmm.
told you that I really love doing Lego, but I couldn't
Hmm.
figure out a business model for puzzles and
Right.
Lego, right? I
Puzzles. I
like
heard
building
puzzles.
things. So I couldn't find a business model around it. But the reality is, there are some massive YouTube accounts that are just people doing Lego and puzzles, and they are millionaires, but it wasn't my story. That's okay. I
Hmm.
tried what I know you spend a lot of your time doing, which is leadership training and consulting. And I tried doing that online, and I still do that to some extent, but I found that everyone who connects with me is inbound. And I put a lot of effort into outbound. So I try to understand the algorithms of Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and ads and getting out there. But despite all of my efforts there, it just didn't click. But what I had a steady stream of is people who had seen me on stage or heard me on a podcast and going, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. I want to learn from him, not just to learn from someone that I see on my
Hmm.
Instagram story. But I couldn't figure that. But I do know, and you know, that there is a massive multi-million-dollar industry around online coaching. But I couldn't
Yep.
step into it despite my credentials in the space. It just didn't click. So that was something else I tried. So I just work my luck. I keep
Hmm.
trying. I keep trying. You said start now, start simple. And then I throw things at the wall and I see what sticks. I could have gone into that studio and they could have told me, no, thanks. We'll just wait it out. We'll wait till the pandemic's over. And then that would have not worked out. So you got to work your luck. That's practically what I'd say is you just got
Yeah.
to keep going. If you're looking for a new job and you apply to 10 jobs, fine. Apply to number 11 and 12 and don't stop. You keep going until it happens. That
Hmm.
is the only way. But I'd also say go wide. So
Hmm.
doing the same thing and expecting a different result is the definition of stupidity, right? So
Hmm.
you also got to go wide. Please notice in my examples, I was talking about literally puzzles to virtual emceeing to music. Like I was going wide with the things I was
Hmm.
trying. And so also do not be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. There's a lot of character development that is necessary with adaptability. One, you got to step out of your comfort zone. Two, you have to be curious. I asked every feasible question because when I asked the music studio to turn into a virtual studio, I didn't know either. I had to learn, what tools do you need? What software do you need? What kind of personnel do you need? I had to ask those questions. I couldn't just snap a finger and say, turn it off, turn it on by tomorrow. I went and Googled everything, researched everything. So you got to be curious. Three, you got to get role models or coaches in your case, right? Find people who've been there, done that, who can guide you, who can help you get to your destination faster. So there's a lot of character development that is part of adaptability.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And there's a quote that's not coming to mind about luck that in effect is that we often think of luck as just something completely outside of ourselves, that it just drops on us. But the
Yeah.
reality is we can, as you say, work your luck. We
Yeah.
can, we can put the wheels in motion, so to
Yeah.
speak. And luck is oftentimes just the result of putting in more effort, being in the right place at the right time, having the right connections. It feels like luck to outsiders, but people who really know the story know that so much went into it before, and you're really not just fortunate, you are somebody who drove your own success. So I think that that's a fantastic point. And one other thing I wanted to pick up on before we transition is that people, you talk about stepping out of your comfort zone, and then there are people who are very boxed in. We all know that many people would rather, die or, God forbid, have something really bad happen to them than to speak publicly. Like there's fear of being out there
Yeah.
and what people are going to think of us. The reality
Mm,
is, I have found as a trainer, and I'm sure you've had this experience as well, most people are much more forgiving and
mm,
kind and rooting for our success almost than we are ourselves. And so I know, for example, when I mess up, but most other people don't. And even if they do, they're willing to let it go because they don't have such high expectations of me to the point where they expect me to be something other than myself. And so
mhm.
we have to allow ourselves the space to know, like, what's the worst that could happen? Right. The worst that can happen is I'll be embarrassed. The worst that can happen is somebody will say something not nice about me. But what's the best that could happen? What's the upside? And I think that that's something
Mhm.
that you deal with all the time.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, you asked a good question. You answered it really, really well as well. So I agree with you entirely on that. I will also say there are practical things you can do to overcome stage fright. It is not something that should prevent you from performing well at an interview or helping you at a sales negotiation or helping you get that promotion. I mean, like public speaking is not just on stage. It's all the
Hmm.
time. It's with your partner. It's with your children. It's on the baseball field. It's everywhere. So you're
Yeah.
always doing networking events. So I would say there is a fear that comes with it as an introvert, right? So that's important to put in there that I'm an introvert. My energy is introverted.
Hmm.
I've had to work extra hard at it. For some
Hmm.
people, it comes naturally to be on stage. For me, it wasn't that case. You could not tell looking at my content now online, but that's my confidence that
Hmm.
work ethic can do what where talent is missing, right? Some people
Hmm.
just got it. God bless them. So happy for them. But work ethic and that right mindset can overtake that any day. And so for me, it was just a matter of learning certain tricks. And some small ones are, for example, walk the stage. If you, prior to being on stage, walk it, you get more comfortable with the physical space. You give yourself a
Hmm.
chance. Second, better practice technique. I'm surprised by the number of people that spend maybe 80% of their time writing this speech and hardly 20% of the time actually practicing it. They wrongly
Hmm.
think that rewriting words is what's going to make them perform it better on stage. And there are some
Right.
very easy ways to practice effectively. So understanding better practice technique. Third, doing yourself a service. If you write with Oxford Dictionary kind of lingo, you're going to stumble. Even I will. But if you
Hmm.
write your speech conversationally with language that
Hmm.
you use every day, you're going to help yourself out. So there's all these things practically as well, which I help people in coaching sessions so they can perform better. But it is the important part here is you can overcome it. And even if it's not stage fright for the stage, whatever it
Hmm.
is that is holding you back. Oh, I could never learn that skill, or I could never be that person. You can if you just start now, start simple.
Yeah. I love the introverted reference as well, because I also identify as introverted, and I share that with people often during my trainings, and they're surprised because I engage very much with the group. It's a little bit different style than what I've observed you do, but very much present, engaging, really putting yourself out there. And so, yeah, it's a matter of how you charge or drain or whatever that process looks like. But that doesn't preclude you from being able to harness what you have, your knowledge, your excitement, and all of that, and channel it in the direction ultimately will serve other people. And I see you're doing that all the time, which is really incredible. I'm curious to know, Dan, from all the great leaders that you've had opportunity to speak with, both on stage and I'm sure off stage as well, what are some of the biggest leadership lessons that you have learned from some of these people, either that are referenced in the bio or others that you've encountered over the years?
That's a great question. First of all, this is something that I struggle with, but I have noticed that some of the greatest leaders know their niche very well, and then they dominate, they optimize for that niche. I am more of a generalist. I like to do a little bit of everything, and I like to spread myself. So I'm a pretty good piano player, but I'm not aiming for exceptional. And I'm a pretty good speaker, but I'm not aiming for exceptional. And I'm a generalist, but I found that some of the best leaders in the world focus entirely on the 5 or 6 things they can do, some of them on the one thing they can do, and then they establish a team to do everything else. And so this is, I think, really, really healthy by those who, so for example, there's this award-winning Formula One racer, and he is exceptional at communication. He's exceptional at social media marketing. He's exceptional at being the face of things. But give him a 40-page report and ask him to read it, not happening. Ask him to sit down in a boardroom setting for more than, I don't know, an hour, not happening. So what does he do? He built an amazing investment team, and he's one of the leading people in sustainability right now, especially around electric mobility. But he's built a team around it. He does the part he does well, which is education, awareness, excitement, hype for the future of mobility. But he's built a team to do all the other parts that are essential in that business empire, which is vetting, which is scouting, which is client relationships, partnerships, and everything else. So this is one thing I've seen with good leaders is they know themselves really well. We can summarize that as self-awareness. That's the first part. Know yourself really well. Second part is optimize on that self-awareness. So do the part you do well, outsource everything else to others. Third, they're very good at hiring people and aligning people to a vision, a shared vision. I rarely meet the best teams in the world that do not all believe in the same thing. They all have different roles, but the marketing manager is aligned to the same macro goals as the salesperson, as the partnerships person. They all believe in the same top goal, not just, oh, I've got to hit this metric by the end of the week. So I would say really good leaders are good at casting vision and transferring vision. So it's not just them that hold on to vision, but the rest of the team feel it too. And on a personal level, one thing I've noticed, 2 things I've noticed among the top leaders as far as them individually. Number one, they all have very good morning routines. It's one of my favorite questions to ask people backstage is, what do you do in the morning? And most of them are very intentional about their mornings, which is great. And the second pattern I've noticed is most of them are really involved in extreme sports and sports that involve perseverance. I've seen a very high correlation between founders, presidents, prime ministers, artists, and marathon running, skiing, kite surfing, those kind of activities, which is also super interesting.
And why do you suppose that is?
I read a book about, I think it's called Stealing Fire. And it talks about this correlation. They studied Navy SEALs, they studied athletes, and they studied CEOs of the biggest companies in the world. And so what combined these 3 completely distinct industries together? And they noticed that there is this correlation between all of them. And essentially, what you invest in your personal time is also the person you bring into your professional space. So if you understand long distance thinking by training for a marathon, you bring that mindset to work as well. If you're willing to take risks on the slope, you bring that mindset to business as well. If you play a sport that involves a team, you naturally bring that team spirit to work as well. So the correlation seems pretty strong because of that. And also with things like sports and certain sports, you're building a lot of soft skills that are necessary, essential to success at work too.
You know, it's so interesting as you're talking, I was thinking about this, Dan. You know, when I do any type of leadership training, certainly when I do research pertaining to a book I'm writing or an article, the kinds of leaders that often rise to the top fit into two of the industries you just mentioned, the military and professional sports. And I think that's largely because it's a zero-sum game, right? There's a winner and a loser. There's a champion and the runner-up, or whatever that looks like. And so when I have a General Patton or a Michael Jordan or whatever whoever that person is for you, it's clear that they reach the pinnacle of their industry. And so we could clearly nominate them as leader of the decade or whatever. When it
Right.
comes to life, whether that's in the business space or just other areas in which we operate, it's not so clearly defined. There are many, many leaders, there are many, many winners. You don't necessarily, win your market share. You have a chunk, a meaningful chunk. You might be a billionaire or many times over, but it's not as black and white, I guess you would say. And so maybe that's the reason historically that we have utilize these kinds of paradigms as the example of the leader that we seek. But what's interesting is that the people who are leaders for the most part, the kind of leaders that are most approachable for most people, because most people are not going to be the best basketball player in the world. Most people are not going to be the greatest soccer player. Most people are not going to be necessarily the top military commander, but we all could be super, super good in leading our company, organization, family, etc. And so it's interesting to see that people, whether they do it intentionally or not, are tapping into some of the benefits, if you will, that athletics and that real competition in a military context, those kinds of things, we utilize them, and whether we intend to it or not, we wind up bringing it back with us and sort of incorporating it into our practice at home.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's sort of like I never quite knew where to go with it, but it's sort of like coming together in my mind. So I'm going to ask you one final question of this segment. It's a question I ask all of my guests because it's so important. I find that anyone who's listening, really for all of us, we often think this guy, oh, he's an incredible MC, so successful, probably had that all within him. I know you've unpacked it for us and told us that wasn't the case, but nonetheless, we learn, I think, most from our mistakes. And so my question to you, Dan, is what would you say was the biggest mistake that you have made that has positioned you later for the greatest success?
That is a great, great question. I am relatively risk averse. There are things now that I wish I had stepped into earlier. So practically, I've been involved in the blockchain community for a very long time. But to this day, I do not own any cryptocurrency. I'm just too scared. And yet I have been immersed in this community. I know the ups and the downs. I know the decision makers, but I have a feeling that 15 years from now, I'll be like, why? Why didn't I do that? Or even with some of my startups, right? When I look back, I had the formula. I just didn't have the mindset and the character to follow through on it. And that's part of life. You just got to learn the hard way and develop that way. But when I look back, I go like, oh, I was so close. If I know what I know now, I would have absolutely done it back then. So as I say, like life is easier looking through the rearview mirror than looking ahead. And I'd say, for me, I'd say a big part of it is being risk averse. I'd say that is a character flaw, a struggle that has held me back in some ways, but for the same reason has also set me up, because where I lack in risk, I do not lack in building strong foundation, being heavily researched, meticulous, detail oriented. And that is why now when I'm on stage, if a mic goes off, I know where that spare mic is because I set it up personally. I set up where it is, I set up on what channel, and I set it up to be mute or not mute. That is a level of detail because I know that in a live event, somebody's mic is going to go off. And I am the person that is going to fix it at that moment. I know literally what lights are positioned on what part of the stage. If I'm doing a stadium where it's even larger crowds, there are way more lights. I am at rehearsal all day, meeting the technicians, meeting the production crew, knowing them by name, building the relationship. So this is because I am not cool at just winging it. I am not, I'm risk averse. I'm not just going to show up and hope for the best. I'm the opposite. And so it is that level of detail that I think has made me a very dependable professional MC, because there is nothing that goes without my notice or attention at any point, and even the smallest details, because you can avert a problem if you're good at picking up on patterns and something that is off. So I can see a loose wire before others can, and I can anticipate what happens to that loose wire before others do, and then step in quicker. So yeah,
Nice.
I would say
That's
that
nice.
is my answer to that question.
Okay, so rapid fire time. Answer short and sweet. Let's jump right into it. Think of it
I'm ready.
almost as that last two. I forget what they call that segment on the Family Feud, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay,
I'm ready.
number one, the best, and I know I'm running the risk of getting you in trouble here. The best speaker you've ever heard.
I think it'll be next week with Michelle Obama.
Oh, wow. Okay, a tech trend we should all be aware of.
Oh, of course, AI.
Your go-to method for recharging.
Playing the piano.
The coolest venue you've ever been to.
Ooh, that is a tough question. I'd say the convention center in Poznan after they've done all of their production to it.
Nice. Now, I know you've simplified your name, but the funniest mispronunciation of your full name.
I think people tend to add more. So my name has two AMs in it, so it's Rama Murthy. But some people have added a Ramanama Murthy or Rama Mama Murthy. So the middle part of that name is just extended itself.
Got it. Okay.
To simplify it and save people embarrassment, I just go by Dan Ram.
Sounds like a plan. And let's go with the last one, a productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
Oh, for sure. I'm competitive. I like to gamify things. So I break it down to a doable task and I put a time limit on it. And then it's a race against time.
Nice. Okay. So how can people connect with you, learn more about your work, check you out?
Super easy. Find me online. Just look up Dan Ram. I'm pretty active. I create free content daily. I do not use social media to monetize. And so I've got lots of tips on public speaking, on productivity, efficiency, time management, all those fun topics. And so that's Instagram daily, LinkedIn every 2 days. I respond to all my direct messages and LinkedIn messages. I'm online because I want to create conversation. I want to help people. And so
Nice.
you can find me there. Yeah.
Okay. And finally, one final life lesson to end the episode.
I'm going to steal one from you, my friend.
Okay.
You on April 22nd was standing outside your house in front of a cherry blossom tree.
Ooh.
And you were commenting about how everything happens for a season. And with those particular flowers, they go pretty fast. And yeah, I think you also commented about Passover and how it's for a season. So whoever's listening, whatever season you're in, if you're in a season of winning, stay humble because that season changes. And if you're in a season of hurting, stay hopeful because that season will also change. So yeah, just see life in seasons and chapters. And thank you for sharing that message.
Super. Wow. Wow. What a great way to end. I've learned so much. Very excited to share this. And I can't wait to learn more about what you're up to and just continue to watch your journey. Really, really inspiring.
Thank you for having me as your guest.
You got it. My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.